Okay, there's Facebook. Here is YouTube. And we are live. Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And we're really pleased to have Nev March here back with us to talk about her brand new book, Peril at the Exposition. And Nev signed a bunch of books for us. Oh, wow, put quotes in them too. How cool is that? And so I will go ahead and put a buy link in the comments field should you like to purchase one. And we're delighted to have Julie McElwain with us to do the special guest hosting duties. And here's a copy of Julie's latest book, Shadows in Time. It's here right there. So if you have questions for Nev or Julie during the program, just go ahead and put them in the comments field. And Barbara will usually summon me back on screen towards the end of the hour. So we have our own little spiel. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, since we're going to the Chicago World's Fair, we can pretend this is some sort of magic on the midway that I do. But Patrick and I really do have a good time. We've kind of worked out our deal. Anyway, Peril at the Exposition succeeds Murder in Old Bombay, which was Nev's first book, and which was one of our Book of the Month Club picks when it came out. I thought for some reason I was so overwhelmed with all this. This is her third book, but she's reminded me she's just writing the third book. This is the second. And an interesting thing, which I'll come back to, is that it moves its location. But let me say a few words of welcome to Julie McElwain, whom we have not had the pleasure of meeting. She has 5 books in her series. And luckily, she has paperbacks as well as hardcovers. So Julie, just say a moment or two about your own work before we plunge into Nev and the slideshow that we're going to have.
Oh, well, basically my book is about a modern FBI agent, a woman who is transferred back in time. So she has to solve mysteries basically in Regency England. So there's a lot of historical fiction, which is why I love Nev's books. I mean, you know, she's done so much research and I really appreciate that.
You didn't realize when you started this that Regency England was going to have such a moment, did you? But with Bridgerton and all, I mean, we're all of a sudden being overwhelmed with more. It's my personal favorite historical period because I grew up on Georgette Hare and Jane Austen. And, you know, so I have some trouble with some of the interpretations that we have seen. A real Regency does not have a lot of actual overt sex, for example. Yeah. But, you know, unfortunately, or depending on how you look at it, maybe fortunately, it's gone in that direction in various genres. But anyway, it's a great period. It's a lot of fun to write about. So Nev, one of the things I was thinking about, because there's a new book called, I think it's called Miss Aldridge Regrets. I'm not sure I quite have that right. But in any case, basically what it is a mixed race woman who's grown up in England and sails aboard the Queen Mary with a group of Americans and suddenly discovers that Americans do not have the same attitude, and she does not have the same freedom that she had in Britain, which really exposes our racial history. And so you've moved Jim and Diana from Bombay to Boston, and then they get to Chicago. But they're going to run into, if they move to escape caste and so forth, they're actually going to run right back into it in the United States. So that might be an interesting question for you guys to discuss. But I know you have a slide program, so why don't I pass this over to Julie, and the two of you go ahead and present your talk.
Yes, well, actually, I think, Nev, you wanted to do the slide program first. I'm assuming it's going to be a lot of your research. So I'm really interested in seeing what you have here.
Oh, I did so much research and I loved every bit of it. It's sometimes too much. This is the risk of getting into period of time or a place that you enjoy so much. Before I jump into the slides, I just say thank you to Barbara and Patrick. Poison Pen did the launch of my first book. I was honored to do the launch for Sajata Massey's third book, I think, in her series, The Bombay Prince, which was lovely. And Julie, I just loved your book so much. And I know what it takes to write this. So when the question came up, who would you like? I said, well, someone who's ahead of me, who's done a lot more. I want Julie. So thank you for agreeing.
Oh, it's like I said, it's such an honor. And yeah, I definitely want to ask you about your process in terms of research and going down these rabbit holes, which I always, takes days sometimes you come out of. And
Oh yeah, you get way deep. So before, so let's jump into the slides, because I think that is going to spur a lot of questions for yourself, of course, and for some of the folks who may be watching on Facebook, on the link, and hopefully that will encourage them to ask questions as well. So put the questions in the chat, and I know we will have a way of retrieving them. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And I'm not actually going to do a personal introduction. It's all in the slides, all of it. So hopefully at this point you can see, ta-da, the gorgeous cover that Macmillan commissioned. This is the cover of the book is actually a postcard that they colorized. There are no color photographs from the time. So they actually did some art to create what the electricity building would look like, because it's uplit so beautifully. So let's go into, yes. So I'm going to start with thank yous, right? Minotaur, Porter Macmillan, and essentially, helped me launch my career. I won the Mystery Writers of America's Award for Best First Crime Novel in 2019. There are some wonderful other writers who I must give a plug for. Thank you, Julie, for showing that the picture of the Murder in Old Bombay, and it's coming. Sue Cox won it before me. Lovely, lovely writer. She writes about time in San Francisco. And then Joanne Schaffhausen won it the year before. And she has, I don't know, maybe half a dozen, maybe more, maybe a dozen books to her credit. Some very gripping. If I read Joanna's books, I usually cannot sleep that night. Very gripping indeed. But the book, Murder in Old Bombay, won some wonderful recognition. And I'm just so pleased. I couldn't be happier. And I have to give a plug to Vic Adam, who did the audio version, the audiobook. Marvelous, marvelous voice actor. And I'm pleased with Safia Inger, who's just done Peril at the Exposition. And Vic had a role in it too. More thank yous. This is us before COVID, when we could actually sit around without masks. My wonderful writers group in the library. You see, we just have things lying on the floor. It's just such a nurturing environment. Thank you to all of them forever. Here is Murder in Old Bombay. So in this book, it's based on a real tragedy that occurred in 1891. We meet the protagonist, Captain Jim Agnihotri. He's mixed race. As Barbara pointed out, there are some interesting stories about mixed race people these days. And he's slightly beat up. He starts out actually in hospital in the first scene. And he has his client, Adi Framji, for this book, for this mystery. And Diana makes an appearance because she's Adi's sister. Of course, part of the doomed romance and so on forms a subplot, again, to do with race. So the story continues in book 2. And as Julie's 5 books attest, the characters keep developing. So I took 2 risks in this book. I had the location change from Bombay in India, colonial India had such a rich tapestry to offer. I moved it to briefly Boston, and then most of the book is in Chicago. But it's during the 1893 World's Fair, which has got so much to offer. Second risk, it's mostly Diana's story. Yeah. And I know I'm going to get readers emailing me saying, how'd you do that? We wanted more of Jim. Well, he's there. He's not gone. And she's, essentially the story has the dual protagonists. And I'll tell you why I did that in a bit. So here's just the setup. Is they're newlyweds. They've fled the social rules of British Bombay. If they had to stay in India, her family would essentially be ruined financially, because the community there would not accept such a disparate coupling. The race issues very prominent, and even within my own community, the Parsis or Zoroastrians of the time, there was a lot of taboo, really, against intermarrying, marrying outside of the communal group. So she would have been in trouble. Her parents, her family would have been in trouble. So they left, and that took some doing. And they're settled in Boston, but she's struggling to run a household. She doesn't know how to cook. This is a girl who has been brought up to run a big household. And he's, of course, a detective, so he's an operative now. He has an actual job. And they're both young immigrants, so they have to learn the place, the customs as well. So he goes off doing what he usually does, but when he goes missing, then young Diana must venture to Chicago, and completely out of her element. This is a fish out of water story. She is making so many mistakes, some hilarious, some not, some downright dangerous, but she can't be wandering around the dockyard, so she has to trust people. And therein, is the problem, because she has a clue very early on in the book. And the clue contains the words in Jim's handwriting, "Tell no one." With that stricture, now who is she to trust? Because a single misstep could, end in his death, essentially. So here are some of the main characters, and there are a lot of lovely characters. I enjoyed creating these tremendously. Here's Diana. It's not the picture I usually use of her, because this was found on Pinterest as a picture of a lady's muff, which contained a 2-shot Derringer. So Diana has a bunch of strange equipment, of course, given to her by her detective husband, is always trying to protect her. Same picture of Captain Jim. He's just a good-hearted person. He's tough, but there's also a very, very nice vulnerability about him, and he's constantly trying to learn and trusting people, and yet he's very skeptical because he's been beat up so much. Then we have Tobias Brown. This is the closest I could come to the emotion. Tobias is very he's a Black person in 1893, so technically a free Black man. But the Jim Crow laws are in place. There's a lot of essentially casteism going on. And she chooses him, of all people, as her assistant. So it's actually not a bad choice, even though it appears to be on the face of it. She trusts him, and therefore she asks for his help. She also comes across this very unusual young lady, Abigail Morton, who essentially tells her, look, you don't know anything about this place, because it's very obvious that Diane doesn't know anything about this place. And so you need a companion to tell you how to manage, especially if she's a society lady. She's got to be able to, someone's got to tell her the ropes. But everybody has a secret. So, of course, it's set in the World's Fair, and I got some beautiful pictures. The rest of these are just pictures that I love and use for research and were so inspiring. Look at the size of this place. This was a manufacturer's building, and I think every prominent industry wanted a stall here. So the World's Fair covered 700 acres, and the size of these buildings is just mammoth. They were built in 2 years. I couldn't believe it. Most of them were built out of wood, so they didn't, not stone. There are 2 structures still standing in Chicago as soon as possible going back there. So when I migrated, I first came to Chicago in that area. I was in Northern Illinois, in DeKalb, Illinois, in the middle of cornfields. Chicago is a place to go. If the moment somebody, one of the students, grad students, had a car, we'd pile on and try to go to Chicago. Loved those visits, and thank you to all the kind grad students who gave me a ride. That's another picture of the World's Fair property, and you can see just from the size of this building what a monstrous, enormous structure it was. Electricity building, where a lot of the action happens, is right next to it. Then comes mines. This was a show off America was showing off to the world. There's a lot more happening even than that. So there's a wonderful 2-hour documentary narrated by Gene Wilder. He just has such a sweet, calming voice. If you have the time, watch it. It brings the World's Fair to life. I watched it over and over and loved every bit of it. So much going on. So these are some of the structures, but can you imagine going from a dirty, smelly, smoke-filled, dung-ridden city to this magnificent white city? No horses, so no horse dung, no carriages. Everything was run by electricity. You had even boats run by electricity, lights. The first time a city was lit by electricity. No smoke in the air from all the oil lamps. This must have seemed like heaven, and all the classical architecture. And this beautiful, enormous 200-foot statue of the Republic called Big Mary. Of course, the Ferris wheel. George Washington Ferris built this in his 30s. This was America's reply to the Eiffel Tower, right? We were competing, and we said, we'll not only make it tall, we'll make it move. So very much America in let's show the world mode. Of course, everyone's coming to the fair. 27 million people came to the fair over 6 months. It's shocking because the entire population was only 60 million people. Almost half the country was there. You had these society elites. Bertha Potter Palmer, wife of this famous portrait of hers, of course. I mean, look at her. She looks like a queen with this tiara and is holding a orb and scepter, for crying out loud. She chose the art, which is still in Chicago's art gallery, the art gallery that is one of the last remaining buildings of the World's Fair. And you know, all the elite were there. But Chicago wasn't a happy place. You had 500,000 men seeking work. Only 40,000 of them had worked on the property, and the rest of them were desperately seeking work, unemployed, not even able to afford the 50 cents that it took to enter a day pass at the World's Fair. So although you had people coming from far and wide, this is the ugly underbelly of the Gilded Age. So a lot of disgruntled workers, unemployed workers, but you also had a ray of sunshine in the 1893 Parliament of World Religions. This guy here, look at him, Swami Vivekananda. And I heard that he was a speaker. He brought Vedanta and Hinduism and yoga. He brought yoga to America. Can you imagine this guy? He's young, he's 30 something years old. He actually died before he was 40, okay? The marvelous orator. And so he comes in there. He actually came with a famous Parsi industrialist, J.N. Tata. And there's a story about that. So I'll place that on hold. And the world's religions are talking amicably together. The first interfaith event in the world. But at the same time, in the same place, that same summer, you have the World Convention of Anarchists. This really happened. This really happened. Chicago hosted the World Convention of Anarchists while you had half the country coming through Chicago to the World's Fair. Oh my God. What could go wrong, right? So that's it. Those are the slides. Peril is out. Peril at the Exposition is out today. You see Murder in Bombay, and so I have these bubbles going up because I'm writing book 3 right now. It is set on a steamship. That's all I'm going to say about it. Very compressed timeline, but set on a steamship, and who knows what happens next.
Well, I've got to say that I when I knew you were writing Peril at the Exposition, I ordered it right away before you even asked me to do, to talk to you about this. And it's on its way. So I only have this. I read it, but I read it. I got an email, so I read it online. And I got to be honest, like I said, this on Murder in Old Bombay, I fell in love with Captain Jim. So I just thought he was he's just the nicest guy and so clever, and his journey throughout this book and the love story with Diana, it was wonderful. I was surprised you did when you chose to tell the story, not all of the story and Perils of the Exposition, but starting the story from Diana's viewpoint. When you were writing, first of all, when you were writing Murder in Old Bombay, did you have an idea that this is going to be a series? Did you already kind of in your back of your mind think of Peril at the Exposition, or was this a standalone?
It was a standalone. It was Jim's story, Captain Jim's story, and the trouble was that I had so much material. So Murder in Old Bombay started out at 145,000 words. That's too long, right? So progressively we cut and cut and cut, ended up at 115,000 words. So I had tons of material I wanted to use, but didn't have a spot for it. But that's not why Peril came to being. I just had a lot of conversations that the couple had that had no place in the book, in Murder in Old Bombay. But the interaction between them had so much potential because in some sense, the male-female dynamic has been put on its head because she comes from an upper-class family, wealthy, industrialist, traders, whatever. And he's mixed race. He's a bastard. He's illegitimate. He has no standing, no social standing. So the ordinary male dominance is completely flipped. And yet they're both okay with it. So how do they figure things out? I just had so much in that content in that journey that didn't make it really into Murder in Old Bombay, and I think Diana got shortchanged because of that. So she would not leave me alone. She would not leave me alone, and I kept going on, with I want my say. Where's my story? And so the one time I said, all right, sit down, and I told her, write me a letter, all right, because I don't know what you want. So she wrote the letter. I still have the letter. She wrote the letter. I can't find him. He keeps going away like this. I went, what? This is my next book.
Oh, that's what. When did you write the letter? Was it while you were writing like a Murder in Old Bombay, or was it afterward, or
right after? I think it was right after, because in Murder in Old Bombay he goes off twice, maybe three times. Yeah. Disappears off to do something and comes back to her. He comes back with the strays, the urchins, the orphan children the first time. Second time he goes off on a military expedition. The third time he's actually off doing some undercover work in the dockyard. All important to the story, but now from her perspective, it must be very frustrating. Where's he gone? Is he safe? He won't even, give regular reporting because he's undercover. So I thought, wait, that's why she's full of angst. He goes off and does his thing. And I think from a male point of view, that is a very normal thing to do. I go off to work, I do my thing. He's a detective, he goes off on a job. But now this book tells you what it's like from the female point of view, when men are just being men.
And going off.
I
loved it.
Thank you. I'm going to show you one more thing, which is the dedication page, which you may not come across at all. But if anyone can read that, it says, "To my husband, happy 30th anniversary. Aww. Thank you for these years." So I know guys. I've been married to one for 30 years. I have 2 sons and a lot of friends that are also male. But that, I don't think they realize when they're just being themselves, doing things that guys do, how very frustrating that is for women. So if Murder in Old Bombay was an eye-opener for women in terms of how men think and sometimes get themselves into a lot of trouble, then this should be an eye-opener, I'm hoping, for some men to see how their behavior is very frustrating for women.
Well, it was. What I really like too is not only you told the story through Diana's eyes, but she's growing as we see her in America. We see her growing more developing as a person. She's very strong, but she never loses, I feel she never loses her femininity. I mean, I think she's always a very feminine woman, and, but just the strength to her that, is that something you really wanted to, come across?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. There's intrinsic strength. One doesn't have to be able to bench press 200 pounds to be strong. There's different kinds of strength. In fact, there's an inner core, and this book questions her inner core as well, because she's always had a clear sense of right and wrong. Growing up Zoroastrian, we are very, very clear on right and wrong. That sort of integrity is something we'll teach 3-year-olds. Like, is that a made up story, or you just thought about it, or it really happened? This just it's part and parcel of a fabric of our community, is telling the truth. And yet she's put into situations where she's downright escalating her criminal life. She's doing flat out wrong things. But I wanted to bring up this difference between a very black and white view of the world, which is what her parents have, which is what a lot of parents have, our Zoroastrian parents have, to a situational morality where the goal matters, how you do it matters. Yes, nothing justifies the end. The means are not, validated by a positive ending, but the fact that there may be extenuating circumstances, that there may be a time when one has to bend the rules. And so this is a big journey for her. There's also the massive immigration journey for her, right? The emotional journey that she goes through. And I think this is, many immigrants will have this. I know I had it 30 years ago. You come in and you just, are just so full of awe and delight. And then slowly things start to happen. People maybe not give you a job, or in my case, my legal name is a very, antiquated, difficult name to pronounce. And so that people would throw out my resume because you had a foreign name, you were not employable. Those things, racism, flat out. But more than that, there's selfishness you discover. There's the cliquism, and slowly that delight that you had in the new country gets eroded. And until a lot of people want to go back home. But for me, I was so blessed in finding a few friends, even though I was penniless, to the extreme, a student in Illinois. The Walk family adopted me. They took me in Thanksgiving. The Tata family, Shiraz Tata and her husband, so kind, took me to their place on weekends. I had somewhere to go. So, gave me a whole bunch of spices, because how do I eat the American food? I survived for 1 week on grapes and salami. Those were the two things I could recognize in the grocery store. I was like, how big is this cauliflower? I don't know what it is. Like, this would feed 40 people. I can't buy this. So I couldn't find anything to eat for a week.
That's funny.
So Shiraz gave me spices, Indian spices. I got orientated back to, you can find similar things, and just so much kindness that changes the dimension. Suddenly you realize, yes, there is the commercial side, the fact that everyone is out for themselves. Yes. But then there are these inexplicable acts of kindness, even from strangers. And that blew me away. It redeemed America in many ways, in my mind. And sort of, I recovered my faith in humanity even through that experience. So, that's the journey.
Well, I can definitely see that in Diana's journey in Perils of the Exposition, because to me that is what came across was, America seen through an immigrant's eyes, and there is awful things that can happen, and there was wonderful things that happened, and it was to me very nuanced, and what you wrote was very nuanced and complex, which I appreciated. So.
Thank you.
I did want to ask you, because I do think, and historical fiction is always, I mean, to me, it's a different animal sometimes, because especially with you, like the first book, you did take a true story and you wrapped this fictional world around it. And same with, you know, Perils of the Exposition, we're dealing with the World's Fair. A lot of historical figures are in your book.
Oh, yes.
How difficult, how challenging is it? And do you feel pressure when you put in historical figures as a writer to, you're creating a world, that's out of your imagination, but on the other hand, you're wrapping it into a lot of these,
oh yeah. Oh yeah, it is difficult. It is so difficult. So I admire Nikola Tesla so much, and he got such a raw deal. History doesn't give him half the credit that he deserves. So I wove him into the story, and it's scary because you do want to be true to the persona of the person, the way that they were seen at the time, the things that have been written about them. But so you want to reflect some of their frailties, their humanity. At the same time, I had so much admiration for him that it had to be carefully nuanced. J.N. Tata, Jamshedji Tata, also came to the parliament and so on, and he's represented in the book. But there are many others. There's the actor, I think William Gillette is in there, and there's a little joke, if you will, at the end, because Gillette is the guy who made Sherlock Holmes a household name. He played Sherlock Holmes 3,000 times on stage before films, right? But in this book, I have him not knowing who Sherlock Holmes is. So a few jokes, that are explained in the author's notes, if people care to read that. There are a few, I think they're called Easter eggs.
Yes,
there. Just for folks to discover and enjoy. There's a lot of layers, as you mentioned, and I love building the story on historical facts. So the first book was entirely based on an actual tragedy, and I took all the details of that tragedy and built that into the book. Well, here we have 6 disparate events that all really happened, all of them. Right. So if you read this book and you see something very bizarre, it really happened. All the bizarre things really happened. And I want to assure people about them because they're really bizarre and sometimes tragic. There was a fire at the World's Fair. This is what people at the time were terrified about, is that there would be a fire with thousands of people inside a building. It was a cold storage building, and 16 people did die. They were firemen, most of them. But that really did happen. So I wove that into the story. It is somewhat unexplained to date why exactly that fire occurred. There was a trial. Daniel Burnham, the chief architect, was even found culpable for it. It was just a mistake in the construction. There was something in the design. The architectural design did have certain feature that was never implemented in the construction. And this is all happening very fast. So who do you blame? But that fire did occur. It's in the book. The parliament did occur. It's in the book. The World Convention of Anarchists, same time, same place, in the book. There's also some very peculiar things that happened on the Ferris wheel. So yeah, all the strange things actually happened. And I love to tie a thread through them to explain them, but also make them part of this bigger story. And for me, the bigger story was really this Gilded Age contradiction, where you had the wealthy with so much money, and yet they're not able to, or they didn't want to pay labor a fair deal. Why? If you're Carnegie, why not? Why not pay them? If you're Frick, if you're these Potter Palmer, the founder of what became Marshall Field's, the department store, billionaire. In today's day, his wife eventually went to Florida and purchased an enormous amount of land in Florida. She's credited, Bertha Potter Palmer was credited that developing parts of Florida into the cities we know today. So they had money. Why didn't they pay a decent wage, right? And those contradictions, you had unions, but then you also had them getting very violent. They had already thrown dynamite at police, the Haymarket riot. They had already had altercations with the Pinkertons. They shot at people. So a lot of these contradictions, this was the story. And I just needed two sympathetic outsiders to tell the story, so that people in Chicago kind of know this story, but they also have their own skew. Well, I want to tell you the same story from how it looks to somebody who doesn't have any skin in the game. This is how it looks to the rest of the world. This is how it looks to immigrants. This is how it looks to young people who haven't been brainwashed. This is how it looks to them. So this comes to my biggest motivation is that the more I read about history in this country, the more I understand the factions and the turmoil today. That Hemingway phrase, right? The past isn't dead. It isn't even past. It's still here with us.
Yeah.
And it's very much here with us. This labor versus capital divide gets a new name, gets a new reinvention. Now it's a political divide. Now it's an ideological divide. Very much present today.
Isn't that the interesting though? Because that's, I must say, when I do historical research, and then with my own books or whatever, it just amazes me how human nature doesn't seem to change. I mean, we do kind of have the same repeating patterns.
Yes, yes. I have to just quickly jump into your book for 1 second, because I learned so much from reading your book. So you have one big advantage, which is that your protagonist is a modern woman.
Yeah,
that's like a modern woman. Diana doesn't. Diana has to be traditional. She's also brought up in a very proper way. So she's questioning, should I even open the door to a Black man?
Yeah.
In India, she wouldn't. He would be considered, an old retainer or something. She would meet him outside. She wouldn't let him in. That would not be appropriate. It's not about racism at that point. It's just, conventions of the time. Well, she thinks like that. But when I come back to your books, I go, you got the outsider point of view beautifully, because you're looking at that era from modern sensibilities. And yet it's not a top-down, supercilious kind of approach. It's done with understanding. She's trying to figure out her way. And so I love Kendra. Kendra is so charming because, and she blunders.
Yeah, a lot.
And it's so funny and it's so real. So I could totally relate to that. But I just think you've done such a great job with the outsider perspective, not being critical, in that I know better than you kind of way, but seeing what's bizarre about that time and recognizing it, and then having to work with it, because she cannot afford to be arrogant.
I know. Yeah, no, that's always, to me, it was very important that I didn't come, with that arrogant perspective, because I think there are things that we may have lost as a culture, that they had, and, so I wanted her to learn as well, which that's what, but to be honest, that is why I love this book, but with the Diana, because, even like you said earlier with cooking, because she comes from a very affluent background. And one of the things I really did like is that her family is really a loving family. She comes from a very loving family. So, that they didn't really want her to go down the path with Captain Jim, because it just wasn't in their world. But eventually they recognized that is, she loved him, and, so that they would make it work and stuff like that. So, that's why her growth to me has been really delightful to read.
Thank you. She goes through a lot in this book, self-doubt and terror. And, essentially, initially just being terrified that he's dead, but then going in, putting herself into places that she can't. she's not equipped to handle. So I find those situations very interesting, because don't we all get into those? Once in a while, somebody asks you to speak and you're like, oh, shoot, I'm not equipped to handle this. or you have to take up something. You're an executor for somebody's estate, or you have to suddenly travel to a foreign country. And we all get put into these bizarre, unusual situations where we don't have a roadmap. So now how do you figure that out? I love those situations where someone's trying to make new connections, ask the right questions. It's very it resonates deeply with me to have that, my characters seeking out and trying to figure things out. I mean, they didn't have Google.
Yeah.
That matter today with the internet. You need to know something to know what to search for.
Right.
So, how do you ask the right questions? Get something, the right questions. Otherwise, you end up with tons of scholarly papers and you're struggling. So
Exactly.
I love that fish out of water kind of environment as well.
I agree. Now, I know you have historical people in your books or whatever. Were Captain Jim or Diana inspired by anybody, or just Diana maybe by your own experiences, as you've mentioned? Or
she's more privileged than I was growing up. We were a very middle-class family, but a very loving family. I was really blessed in that. But I did make the leap to come to the US, in the days before mobile phones. So 30 years ago, it cost me $20 to make one phone call to my parents. And
yeah.
I had to ration myself. I'd only speak for like 9 or 10 minutes tops. I couldn't afford to speak longer. 10 minutes per week is very hard. But so she does a lot of the things I did. She's more spunky, I want to say, than I. She's a little bit more savvy even. I was very naive even at 24. And I came here, I was very so protected by, I never found my way anywhere. I'd always been escorted. Can you believe at 24, my whole life, I had been taken by a father, a brother, an uncle, so very protected. But she's also got a little, inner grit to figure things out. She gets a little bit into trouble. And I think that that's reasonable. To have a character succeed when they are so ill-equipped, for me, felt just unrealistic, not credible. And so a few reviewers have said, well, she gets into trouble, she gets other people into trouble. Yes, that's the problem with not knowing what you're doing.
That's true.
Yes, I agree.
I think that's kind of, I don't know, for myself as a reader as well, I like to read characters that are a little bit more flawed, or, because I do feel like that is more realistic.
Yeah, indeed. So Captain Jim is based on a few characters. Diana is a conglomerate of all the spunky girls I knew growing up, and a little bit of my own experiences, and sort of maybe even an alter ego in a way. Captain Jim is such a sweetheart, and he's again a composite of people I know, and some of them have passed on. I had an uncle who was a colonel in the World War II in the North American campaign, and some of his experiences in PTSD I've talked about before. I was a teenager, so I didn't know what I was witnessing. It shook me that a very competent, strong person could fall apart like that, and in front of me. I just did not handle it. But it stuck with me that these scars, these wounds, don't really go away. You can deal with them, but they're very deep and they're invisible. And so Captain Jim has some of those pieces: self-doubt, I want to say, lingering recrimination, sense of having done something wrong, even though he did his job. He was asked to. He was just put into the situations that he has a lot of questioning. And I think that is all part of his complex character. In Murder in Old Bombay, Barbara's heard me say this. There's one scene where Captain Jim is sick or unwell or something, and the two orphans crawl all over him. That is a photograph in my mind of my husband and my kids. That's exactly what had happened in that little scene. It's word for word, literally. One of the toddlers tried to smack the other toddler, and they were on top of him. And so rather than scolding them, my husband just put his arms around them and captured their hands so they could not inflict any more damage. That was just...
So before we call Patrick in, I do have one other question, which is that this experience, surely it's going to change the dynamic of their marriage, or the balance of power, let's say, within their marriage. And, at a time when men really did have the power, you've put Jim in a weak place, so to speak, and Diana in a strong place. So as you're writing book 3, you must be developing that.
Yeah, they figure things out. I think in any marriage, certainly my marriage that has lasted 30 years, there's an up and down. There's a time period where one person's goals or needs, or their what they have to do with their life takes priority, and then the family is sort of all orientated towards that person. And then it should shift. It shouldn't be just one person. So I think that balance of power, if you will,
Right.
rejiggered.
But when you're writing historical fiction, you have to be really careful that you don't give her more agency than she might really have been able to have
Absolutely.
at that time.
You are quite right.
It's hard when this is not that far removed from where we are. If you're writing medieval mystery, it's a whole different deal. But it's hard to keep, modern stuff from really coloring the way people behave.
So true. I had to look up some legal precedents for could women own property at this time period. And a judge had said no. And this was 1880s judgment, because to allow a woman to own property separate from her husband was tantamount to allowing her to divorce. This is in an actual ruling that women were supposed to own property jointly. Now, many of them did inherit property, but there were significant restrictions on women at the time. We're talking about the time before the vote. We couldn't even vote. So if you're talking about,
are you taking them back to Boston? What's your, where are you moving them to? Back to Boston?
They will come back to Boston at some point. They have things there. They have people there. They have they as you read the book, you will realize they have property there and they have people that they love there. But they have other adventures as well. So part of the enjoyment for me is the discovery of their new relationship, and as it balances out, it's not always positive. Sometimes we don't accept change very easily. Sometimes we struggle against change. So this is not always an easy change happening. No. That relationship is one of the things that will continue the series. And then there are mysteries happening, elsewhere, shall I say.
No, I think that'll be interesting to travel around a bit with them. So Patrick, come join us. I'll pop up here.
There I am.
Right. And I enjoyed the photos because I grew up in Chicago, and there were still more of those buildings around when I was young than there are today.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Patrick.
I was just going to say, our mutual friend, Joanna Schaffhausen, she says, thanks for the lovely shout out. You're always so generous to your fellow writers. Can't wait to get my hands on Peril at the Exposition. She says, also, I have questions. The first question is, you cut so much from your first book, and apparently it worked so well to inspire the second. Did you also cut out parts of Peril, and will it become part of number 3?
Oh, wow. So I cut much less out of Peril. And with my lovely agent, Jill Grosjean is the best agent that I could possibly ever have had. I actually had a life while writing this book. Versus as opposed to Murder No Bombay, where I literally did not, remember to eat or sleep. My family had to remind me about those things because I was so obsessed. And I think if I did that again, I might have landed in hospital. But with Jill's help, she got me on a schedule. She gave me enough inspiration to keep going. And so I don't have 40,000 extra words in Peril. Peril at the Exposition was written at, I think 105,000 words and came in just under, just under there. So it worked out beautifully. I may have maybe 5,000, maybe 10,000 words, of cut scenes.
Her second question is, she says, second books are so challenging. Oops, I lost it. What have you learned between book 1 and book 2? Has your writing process changed since becoming published?
So from book 1 to book 2 to book 3, it has changed. I do overplot. This is my failing. I learned in Murder in Old Bombay, I had a lot of plot, and we ended up having to cut entire adventures because they were just taking away from the mystery. And that's the reason why we have so much left on the cutting room floor. With Peril, there was less cutting, but I had a few repeats in there, the same pattern of behavior. And so I had a wonderful early reader, Jay, who went through it 3 passes with the same book. So he read this 3 times in the draft form. So that is something, few friends will do for you. And the book is better for it because it is so much more condensed, compressed, and the trajectory is so much smoother. It does have an alternating point of view, which he pointed out could throw off some readers. So we have the chapters that Jim is narrating, we have his name right under the title, so it's quite prominent. And in the first sentence, you can figure out who's talking about it. So wonderful support, I have to say. Second book just benefited from it so much. And the third book, I want to say, has been even more straightforward. I've learned to cut out, so Murder in Old Bombay was 70 chapters, we're down to 50 chapters, something, and then maybe even a little tighter. The time frame is compressed, the language may be a little bit more compressed as well. My process has gotten more efficient, but that doesn't mean I take less time over it. I end up taking the same amount of time over it, but I'm much less stressed and much less frantic. I still end up doing research throughout the time period. I finished the draft of book 3 and I'm still researching. But that's just, the nature of writing historical fiction is always trying to get that accuracy in language or accuracy in whether those things existed at that right time. I will tell you one thing about Peril, and it's that Diana goes through a great deal, but I think people will like her much more than they did at the end of Murder in Old Bombay. She was a charming person, but didn't really get to shine, shall we say, in Murder in Old Bombay. And here she pretty much has the showcase. She has the spotlight, let's put it that way. She's showcased and she has the spotlight.
Who is your favorite, who is your favorite side character in Peril? Not Jim or Diana.
So hard. So Tobias is a charming character, very critical to the plot. And then Abigail, I have to vote for Abigail. Abigail is just so many layers. I had the sense that in a future book, she wants her say. She's very complex and she's hiding so much. I could only give a little glimpse of it in Peril. There has to be an opportunity for her to tell her whole backstory and to become who she can be, to really flourish. She's also very vulnerable, and therefore I just gravitate towards wanting to help her grow.
Let's see. Pat says your descriptions of the White City were amazing, and you've already partially answered this, but she says, where will Jim and Diana be next?
Okay, so all I'm going to say about book 3 is that the whole story is set on an ocean liner.
Oh,
So this is one of those strange things. I had this entire story in my head for when they go from Bombay to Liverpool to Boston, but Peril at the Exposition came out first. And so I went back to my publisher, wonderful publisher, Kelly Ragland, and said, well, can I now write a prequel or a book? Book 3 can happen between book 1 and 2. And she said, no, don't do that. It's too confusing. Let's just have them take another trip, find another reason. They can take another trip. So they're now on board an ocean liner going back to Liverpool. And the entire story is compressed into 9 days. It's so very different. You had Murder in Old Bombay happened over 6 months. Peril at the Exposition is over a few months at least. But I want to experiment with different, it's a challenge with different structures. And so this is a very compressed, a very different structure.
is it kind of like a locked room caper mystery?
It is exactly
That's
that.
key.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. In
Does
more
anybody-
ways than one. Yes.
Does anybody go overboard?
Yes. Yes. Many people.
It sounds fantastic.
Thank you. Thank
That's
you.
about it for the questions that have come in. Let me check YouTube real quick. That's about it for the moment.
Well, it's been a really wonderful conversation, and the slides were great, Nev. Thank you. That was a lovely way to basically do your elevator pitch, but an illustrated elevator pitch, which I thought was terrific. I agree with you that the cover of the book is really lovely. The colors are beautiful. I like the green and the way the hall is lit. Some of the buildings when I was young still survive. You're right about the Art Institute. And my husband's great grandfather, who built the Museum of Science and Industry, the Rosenwald Museum, was based in part upon that. I'm not sure whether the Field Museum still dates from that or whether it was built later. And then, of course, there's the Adler Planetarium. So, when I was a child, we were allowed to go to Marshall Fields. If I could go anywhere in Chicago, if I started at Marshall Fields, it was like, you have to be centered, I think, in a city, a big city. You need a point of reference out of which everything, you can travel. And we used to be able to take the train, the L, or not the L, the North Shore Railroad, or, to Marshall Fields, and then you could go from there. But you can walk to the Art Institute and the other facilities there. So I'm trying to remember, was Navy Pier around?
There were
Navy
a
Pier
few,
existed too at that point, right?
Yeah, so they had a number of piers because so much material came for the fair.
Right.
Constant loading and unloading, which forms part of my plot.
Right.
And,
Well, I mean, Chicago is built on mud. I mean, it has a very unstable structure because it was they had to drive pylons. It's a little bit like Venice. I had to drive pylons down in the whole bit, and it took a long time to, I think Mrs. O'Leary's cow, when she kicked over the apocryphal Mrs. O'Leary's cow and burned down a lot of it, was an opportunity for civic regrowth and for, better buildings. In the same way that the East End of London has really been transformed by World War II. Terrible to live through, but the modernization is impressive. So it was nice to read about it. I thank you for that. Anyway, thank you all for joining us this afternoon or this evening by now. And we do, as Patrick pointed out earlier, have copies of Peril at the Exposition that are autographed by Nev with cool quotes. And we do have Julie's books in stock too, all 5 of them. So give yourself a treat, purchase one. Anyway, hope to see you all again soon. Good night.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, Julie.
All right. Thank you, Nev. Thanks,
It was
everybody.
a great pleasure, all of you.